fascinating gadgets, gizmos, and gear-based technologies.
Welcome to FGGGbT. Now, this is the show that takes your favorite fictional science and technology, and we make it a reality. We are the Brain Trust. I am the Dungeon Master, Daniel J. Glenn. With me, our wizened wizard, Dr. Michael Dennin.
Dan, great to be here. It's been a little while since my last long rest, so I hope I have enough spell slots left to get through the episode.
Well, you are certainly magical, Denon, and we're going to require every bit of spell juice you have in your brain to get through this. But there's one man who used to not have a brain, and he certainly has one now as our dynamic druid, Ben Sieper. So, Ben, how do you expect to get through this episode? Have you rested enough?
Well, I've rested, but I've also prepped a lot of mana potions. You know, who needs rest when you've got chemical energy waiting for you?
That's right. You got your goat juice ready to go. So that's the best way to do it. Today, we are going to talk about the arcane magic users. These are people in the world of fantasy who are able to harness the power of magic. And I think they do that. Really, we're going to kind of crack open these skulls of these individuals and figure out how their brains work. Because arcane magic is very interesting, and it all seems to start and end with the spell slot.
It definitely does, because you need something that constrains the power of the magic user so they don't become godlike. You got two choices. You got your old school spell slots where you control how much you can remember, and the new ones where you just control the amount of energy you have.
That's right, Dan. This really sets up a fascinating dichotomy of the old school neuroscience and the new school neuroscience when it comes to these spells. And also, it sets up some very interesting differences in the brains of the arcane users, the wizards, the sorcerers, and the warlocks.
I think that's right, guys. And we're also going to talk about scrolls being used as magical batteries and even house rules around magical physics. But before we understand spell slots, which are the fundamental piece on how magic users work in the world, especially D&D, we need to understand how magic itself functions here. And we're going to go old school D&D for those listening. We're going to talk a little Vancian magic, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with. And if you're not familiar with Vancian magic, you're probably familiar with Jack Vance, who helped kind of design the early spell rules in D&D. He worked alongside Gary Gygax to kind of figure out this world, because it gets complicated, guys. This is one of the probably the most fabricated of the classes, right? I mean, there were fighters before, like that's, you know, something that's pretty common, but magic is wholly made up, and what you have here is really spells that are ephemeral. They go into your head. They're not just knowledge, but they contain their own magical power, their energy. And once you speak that magical energy into existence, it all fires off in your brain and creates a tangible, real-world effect. But once that effect happens, it disappears from your brain completely, which sounds a little weird, but I think it does make sense.
Well, it does, Dan, though, of course, I do take umbrage. I don't know what the right word is. I can't think of it now because it disappeared from my brain. With one of the sentences you made about magic not being real. I know we already debated that in the first episode, but let's keep reminding our listeners and viewers that magic is real, and hence it follows these scientific rules that were not made up, Dan. They were discovered.
Of course, that's exactly right.
Right. Now, but words, and this is the cool thing about the Vance system, right? Jack Vance recognized that words throughout all of history have been kind of the source and key of power in magic, having the right words, understanding the right words. And there is this idea of all the energy being tied up in the words. So when you say the words and they leave your mouth, your body as breath or whatever, the energy goes with them, and so does the word. So it does make perfect sense from my perspective.
Yeah, and from a neuroscience perspective, you kind of just can think of it as speaking these words. You're not really storing the energy necessarily in your brain, but speaking those words is such a task that you just kind of get a little bit of amnesia for that spell, and you got to study up again if you want to use it again. And you know, we all kind of have that. You know, you go through some traumatic event. I think casting a fireball is kind of traumatic, and you get a little amnesia during it.
Yeah, it's a normal psychological coping mechanism, is what you're saying, through the harnessing the very arcane magic power of the universe. That does make sense to me. But also, what also makes sense are the kind of people's resistance to this type of magic, right? So this did feel weird to me when I would play, because you do have the argument that why do I have to relearn a spell that I already know? And I think there is a little bit of merit to that, because if you learn something, and if, like we mentioned in the previous episode, Denon, if you're studying magic, and that's what a pure arcane magic user does, not someone who's gifted, but someone who has to learn all of this, well, that learning happened. It exists. It's in your brain. You don't make a souffle and then suddenly forget the recipe, right? The one that your grandmother wrote down, all the ingredients. You don't speak it aloud, create the magical casserole, and then it erupts into flames, never to be made ever again, right? So there are some ridiculous parts to this that I think were at the core of why D&D switched things around.
Yes and no, Dan. It's totally, I think, the reason people resisted, but let's keep in mind, many of us, I assume, have had the experience I did where you study for the test, and the act of taking the test, you don't remember the stuff anymore afterwards. I mean, that is a common experience, right? And in a weird way, I think one of the stranger things is it raises challenging issues of, well, can you memorize a fireball twice and then cast it twice? And what would it mean to memorize it twice? Like, that's really odd, right? Like, are you allowed to memorize the spell more than once? And you're right, there's this basic sense of once I learn things, I remember it. But when you really think about your life, think of how much you forget after you learn it. Like, I would challenge you, Dan. I'm sure at some point in your life you memorized all the trig identities. How many of them can you repeat now?
Sokotoa, baby. Chief Sokotoa.
Yeah. So just one of them.
Well, I will tell you what's interesting. I like to plug all the different things that I do, and one of my on my other podcast, Fascinating Nouns, I interviewed Rebecca Chirac, who's being studied by the scientists at, you guessed it, UC Irvine. Go Anteaters, right, Denon?
Oh yeah.
She hasn't forgotten a single thing since before she was born. So, is she the greatest magic user of all time, or would she finally be able to do the one thing that has eluded her entire life, and that is to forget?
Ooh, I love where you went with that. Now, maybe if she became a magic user, then she would start forgetting as she cast the spells.
Right. Yeah. Finally she would forget.
Yeah.
The embrace of forgetfulness.
Yeah, and I think this forgetfulness, like Denon mentioned with, forgetting things after a test, there's this idea of it could be kind of a combination of the two as well. When you're memorizing that fireball spell, you're memorizing both the words, the material components, the recipe for creating that fireball, but you're also kind of storing the energy too. And once you lose that energy, your brain is like, I don't need to remember how to do this spell anymore. The energy's gone. Just like, I don't need to remember what's on this test anymore. I took the test. And so your brain, to protect itself, to make room for something else, just immediately forgets it. And it's like, well, when you get the energy back, maybe I'll remember the spell recipe again.
Well, this is an interesting formula, right? Like, it's an interesting structure. So what you're talking about, Ben, as our brain expert, is that the brain kind of creates these neural pathways and then expends them immediately, and they're gone. And I think, you're an electrical engineer. RAM memory, in your computer is basically our computer's short-term memory. And so what you're saying is that it kind of exists in there, and then once you use it, it's gone because there's no more energy source keeping it active.
Yeah, well, right, and that the RAM analogy is really interesting because RAM has to constantly be refreshed. So in order for the RAM in your computer to keep the memory, it gets read and rewritten constantly. And perhaps the act of casting the spell takes so much energy that it can't do the rewrite cycle while you're doing it, and so you forget that little piece of your memories or your prep of the spell because it can't.
And it's also very much just like not all of our neural pathways are permanent, right? If we think of how the brain works. We've talked about this in a lot of our episodes on weird brain stuff in movies and TV shows. Sleep becomes important to rebuild neural pathways, right? They do break down. You do generate junk in them during the day. Casting the spell might generate even extra junk, making them even more temporary. So this idea of connecting casting the spell to forgetting memory, Dan, when you start thinking about stuff, I get people's, squeamishness with it, but it really made more sense from a biology and neuroscience point of view than at first glance. I think it's actually quite scientifically based that you would do this.
Yeah, I mean, brains are very good at only doing what they need to do. That's how our pathways work. I mean, I can even think about it in terms of the recipe, Dan. You mentioned, the grandmother's souffle or whatever. I don't know about you, but when I'm like scooping, say this, 2 tablespoons of cinnamon in the apple pie or something, as soon as I put that cinnamon down, I don't remember that it's 2 tablespoons. And again, I'd have to go back to the recipe. And so right. I feel like our brain is very adapted to forget things as soon as you've moved past that point of having the energy or the ingredients to do it.
It also makes sense from the rest standpoint, right? You're talking about all these proteins building up in your head. Once these things are firing, we operate at a very high level. Our brains are firing constantly, right? And so that requires sleep to clean out the junk, right? That's a technical phrase. And that's exactly what's happening here when you're resting, right? You rest, you get your spell slots back, all the goo is cleaned out of your head. And that's kind of how the structure works, right? I think that's how this whole Vancian magic works.
And that's the general overall structure, exactly, Dan. Whether you're doing the Vancian or the energy one, the rest is what restores you in both cases. So that kind of is a nice connection between the two models that they kept in both.
Got it. So let's talk about the second one then. So the more modern, spell slots as energy. Now this is, from a gaming standpoint, I don't want to go too metagame. I don't want to steal Ben's gimmick here. I'm not going to go too metagame. But when you start thinking of the rules of how to construct this reality, having spell slots as just simple energy that you can then put towards and power anything you want is more like you've got a certain amount of batteries, a certain amount of 9 volts, and every one of these types of spells requires 1 9 volt. This requires 2 9 volts. This requires a D battery. I think I just made it more complicated than I meant to as I went on with the metaphor, but in some respects, this is kind of how the newer system works with spell slots, right? Just energy.
Oh, definitely. It is just energy. I mean, it's both. You do need to learn the spell, but once you've learned it, you've learned it. So that's cool. You're not going to forget it. And depending on what type of magic user you are, some of them learn it and that's it. You're done. That is burned in your memory. You can never learn another one. If you're a super cool wizard, like I usually am, you keep track of them in a book and you can memorize a certain number at any given time and replace those. And that's how my brain works in reality. And that's why I tell my kids, I use too much of my slots at work. I don't remember anything at home.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's an interesting structure, right? But it makes things more versatile from that metagame standpoint, I was saying, right? You don't have to worry about 2 fireballs every day. You can just have any number of fireballs you want, as long as you have the juice to cast them. Yeah.
Well, and it kind of makes it more of I would say like kind of a whole body experience. Because now instead of it being frying your neural pathways that you've used to memorize the single spell, now it's, you have, your ATP in your bloodstream and, your body was able to digest so much food last night. And so you have this amount of energy and you can use it any way you want, When you're going to the gym in the morning, you can do 100 squats or you could do 100 bench presses, not both, but you have the energy for one or the other. And that's how the system is now.
Yeah, and that's how we decide whether it's leg day or arm day. Right?
Well, exactly. And I do like, though, Dan, your battery analogy actually really worked because it is not quite the continuous energy alone. Right, it really comes in these discrete chunks.
Right. Yes.
And you can, if you need to use a D battery for a AA spell, and depending on the spell, that actually makes it stronger because you've had more energy in your D battery, right? But there are some spells even if you have 4 AA batteries in your brain, you can't combine them and cast a D spell. They are 4 discrete AA batteries. So that's the other interesting feature about it is a bit quantized. And that kind of makes me think of leveraging the magnetism of your brain in a capacitor-like structure, that you have these individual capacitors, each with their sort of individual maximum energy that you store up and you get ready to use. And it's a workout to get them stored and your workout to get new ones built, but you're building these pathways in your brain, as it were.
Yeah. Well, it's important to think you only have one universal battery mount thing, because if you could put 2 batteries in at the same time, you could go up to the next battery level. But for some reason with these spells, you can only put in 1 battery at a time.
That's what I was gonna ask that. So because I'm expanding on this battery analogy. You mentioned, I don't know how many. Let's just say for the sake of argument, 4 AA batteries equal 1 D battery. Okay, I don't know that that's true, but we're going to pretend that it is. So let's say it's AA battery is a level 1 spell slot. A level D is a 4th level spell slot. Could you? I mean, you can't do this, but would it make sense from the theory we're putting forth that you could take 4 spell slots from level 1 and convert them into 1 level 4 spell? I actually like this as a house rule, which we teased earlier. I'm coming a little early on this, but would that be possible?
It definitely has the ability, and there's pieces in there, Dan, that allow you to do this. We're going to get to it later, but when we talk about the different arcane users, their neural structures start to add some of this flexibility. Not exactly what you described, but very similar stuff. So it's super cool that sorcerers can go back and forth and create spell slots out of sorcery points and vice versa. So really, your very, very classic wizard under traditional rules can't do what you just said. Awesome house rule. I would love to put it in. Maybe there's a subclass of wizard that knows how to create different battery slots and put 4 AA batteries in together and create that D battery. But this is what is cool about the energy analogy, is it does create more flexibility for more flexible magic systems, because you are just manipulating energy. And I like that piece of it.
Yeah, just get some duct tape and some paper clips, and you can hook. You can put 4 AAs in parallel and make a D battery. Probably it's probably about right.
I think so. Well, that go juice you were talking about earlier, right? I'm not talking about these aren't batteries you're putting together in your head, right? You need that mana juice in order to get your brain working the way it's supposed to. That is the mental equivalent of tying 4 AAs
and to throw
together.
in a third crazy system, which we probably shouldn't talk about. There is the mana pool version where you have like say 1,000 mana and a level 1 spell costs 10 and a level 10 spell costs 100. And that's how you sort out your spell energy for the day.
That's pretty good. That's all you're working with is AAAs, and it takes a certain number of AAAs.
Yep.
I like that, actually. I like that. That makes the most sense. Well, these battery analogy that we are taking to the extreme, and I think it's appropriate that we are. This is kind of, I want to talk about magical storage, right? I mean, this is something that is also very interesting, because scrolls can kind of keep magical energy. I don't quite understand how it works, but in the world of D&D, if you stumble across a spell scroll, my understanding is if you're a Denon type of arcane wizard, you can take that scroll and learn the spell itself, and also I think you consume the scroll at the same time, thus taking it into your brain of some way. I might be making this way more confusing than I thought, but you're able to, with the scroll, take it and learn the spell itself, but also cast it from the scroll and consume, much like my grandmother's souffle recipe, consume it completely so that it's never to be spoken again. I think that's how it works. Am I right, Dan?
Very close. Basically, Dan, I'll add a nuance to what you said. A nuance is you either cast the spell from the scroll or you basically cast it into your spell book, and then you can use it later, right? And so that's kind of the trick as an arcane user. And it is, to your point, I think a beautiful system that goes along with the battery stuff. The scroll has to have both the energy and the words, right? So it is both the battery storage, right? It's a kind of nicely flexible battery in the sense that the way I think about it is you either connect it to your spell book and transfer the energy and words directly to your spell book, or you just like connect it to your brain and cast it out into the world, depending what you need. So if you get a Fireball scroll and you already have Fireball in your spell book, it's just kind of like a portable battery, like for your cell phone. You bring it around with you, and if you run out of spell slots, you've got one more, Fireball charge ready to go.
Right, in case you need it. You never know when you're going to need it. I also realized here for a second, I want to get your thoughts on this, Ben. I was sitting here thinking, well, the battery's an interesting idea, but batteries don't, some batteries explode famously. But for the most part, when you use a AAA battery, it doesn't explode into goo and juice all over your magic wand remote control, right? But
Generally
you guys
speaking.
remember, I don't know, if you guys ever played with this, they were like little snaps, so they had like a little bit of gunpowder in these white little packets, and you'd throw them on the ground, and then they would explode. I think of maybe spell slots are more like that, and in that model, you could take a handful of them and throw them on the ground. Would that have the combined force of, let's say, you're not going to ever create like a nuclear weapon style power coming out of those little things, but you can increase it a little bit. Is this enough of an analogy to work, or should we move on immediately?
I don't know. I mean, if you put enough snaps in a pile and light it on fire, I bet it does blow up.
You think so?
Probably. I don't know. It's an interesting thing because it's a mix. It's both the energy density and the energy there. Like, let's say it is, maybe there's a grain of gunpowder in each one or something. You get 1,000 of them. That's a lot of gunpowder, but they're pretty spread out. So can it create an actual explosion or big reaction because they're so far apart is debatable. You might have to.
I mean, I think what you're talking about here, guys, I remember, I don't know, Ben, if you're old enough, Dan, I assume you are, to have a cap gun that has the strip of paper that you shoot through. I mean, I know for a fact, experimentally, if you whack a whole strip of those with a rock, you get a much bigger spark than if you're shooting them off one at a time. So I don't know how many of you were whacking them with large rocks, but that was certainly fun to do. So you just take it to the limit, Dan. It's natural. You get a long enough strip and a big enough rock. What did the famous Greek author say? Give me a large enough lever and a fulcrum and I can move the earth. Give me a large enough rock and a big enough strip of caps, and I'll set off a nuclear bomb.
I'll blow off a chunk of the earth. Yeah. I think that is what Aristotle. I think he's quoted as saying that at one point. It's in his unpublished works, I believe. But it's certainly something that he said.
Yeah, but I mean, it's the same thing. Like if you put a lot of batteries together and use them at the same time, all that heat from the current flowing being close together, you can get something called thermal runaway, where all of those batteries get too hot and catch on fire, explode. That's what causes a lot of these electric car fires, is this concept of thermal runaway, where like one cell gets too hot and then all of a sudden they're all too hot and you have a big fire.
I think this makes me kind of. I like this conversation of batteries and magical energy, because one question we kind of discussed while we were prepping this episode is, could you industrialize magical storage in a D&D world, right? Like, could you, on an industrial scale, produce scrolls that had this magical energy captured inside? I think that would actually be a really fun idea, that someone figured that out in one of the cities and it's just handing out fireball spells willy-nilly. Maybe to start a revolution, maybe to create a world of all-powerful magic users, maybe as a form of magical religion as they're trying to convert everybody. I'm literally just thinking of this right now, but I don't know what do you think, Denon? Are you someone who would want to see magical storage created at a level unseen in any other world?
I think so. And an interesting twist, when you started saying this, I thought you were going to go a slightly different way. It's interesting that you have these battery storage devices, scrolls, that are always tied to a particular spell. I don't think I've ever seen what I would call the blank scroll, right? That is literally just a source of energy of a particular level. So that you as a wizard, if you're a wizard, you could cast any spell of that level with the scroll, right?
It literally just stores the energy.
It literally just stores the energy. And if you think about it, that's kind of the challenge we face now with our battery technology, right? Is finding the better and better and more efficient batteries that really do what we want because of our energy needs and what we're trying to do. So a D&D world where there is a battery race, i.e. a scroll race, would be a very interesting kind of campaign to sort through and the implications of it. I will point out very briefly, I hate to go backwards, but I have to, Dan. You alluded to not having to clean out the goo of a remote from your AAA batteries. I feel like I'm doing that a lot when my batteries melt in my remotes. I've cleaned out a lot of goo in my life from electrical battery holders. So
Sure.
batteries do explode, and that's the fun other piece of scrolls. You have to make a saving throw usually if you're using these things. And there is always a chance the scroll explodes, not that the spell works, which is an interesting twist when you go down this route you mentioned. If I'm going to commercialize and I take what you said, I take what Ben said about the battery overload, suddenly I'm storing a lot of scrolls next to each other in my pocket. And if they overheat, boom, that's not a good experience. You can have a lot of fun twists in such a campaign.
Well, and the leaking battery comes from running it too low. So that works exactly with the concept of when you use the scroll, it might blow up. You know, if you use like a traditional alkaline battery and run it way too low, you know, it starts leaking.
It does start leaking. It's for sure. You don't want that to happen. And I will say, Denon, what I meant was that if you use a battery, it doesn't blow up every single time you exhaust all of the energy from it. That would be a problem. I certainly have cleaned up battery acid in my life, unfortunately. But luckily not every time.
Yeah, okay.
That's the upside. That's the upside.
Fair, Dan. Fair.
Though to get into the high energies, if you're a BattleBots aficionado like me, a lot of those batteries blow up when they run them too hard. So it's a pretty common thing.
That is true. I have seen that before. But so let's talk about the different types of spellcasters and how their brains are a little different, right? So let's start with the wizard, the scholars, the scientists of the Arcane world. Now, these are guys who use their research, their power of understanding, and apply it to magical ideas. Now, Denon, this is not that dissimilar from a physicist who is able to understand how the world works, given how odd and strange quantum mechanics are. And I know that because we've talked about it about 1 million times on this program.
Oh, so true. And I really just think that's the thing about the wizard. They're very traditional in that regard. They're the traditional study, learn, master how the universe works. It's all about the arcane formulas. It's all about keeping your spell book, keeping track, keeping your notes, memorizing them, being very precise and structured.
Yeah, and as we alluded to in our previous episode, I'm a terrible note taker. So, you know, maybe the wizard isn't for me because, I don't know, maintaining that spell book, keeping it clean and neat, maybe not the best role for me.
It's not, but I think the sorcerer might be for you. You described yourself as having natural talent. Now, I think Denon and I might debate that, but for the constraints of this conversation, let's pretend that's true and that natural talent converts itself into being a sorcerer.
Yeah, the sorcerer has this innate talent. They're able to just channel the energy of the arcane energy without really learning. You know, it's this fascinating concept of their brains just naturally know how to make a fireball, even though you know they didn't learn, they didn't go to wizard school. They're just you know, they're just born with it, and I think that's a really cool thing, that you can have this concept of the wizard who studies and builds the neural pathways themselves, whereas the sorcerer is more like, you know, animals, where it's an instinct, where the spell is part of your genetics and your brain is formed being able to create that spell.
And
well, it's like the famous Maybelline commercial, right? Maybe she's born with it. Maybe maybe it's pure natural, unbridled, a natural ability to control the powers of the arcane world. But that's not as pithy of a commercial, though. We'd have to workshop that a little bit.
We can workshop it a little, but it's also it's what's interesting is, and I alluded to this earlier, it creates a really nice flow. The game mechanic is sorcery points versus spell slots. And you get this flow back and forth where you can turn your natural energy into spell slots, but you can also use your natural energy to do cool things. And so the sorcerer can twin their spells, and they can make their spells go faster. They can quicken them. And they can use a lot of these D&D game mechanics that the wizard can't. The price they pay is they only get the ones that they sort of know innately and were inborn with. So they get a lot of cool spells, but not as many as the wizard. And I love that trade-off because it really goes down to, what kind of brain structure do you have, and then how do you leverage it?
I mean, in my mind, it's really just like the difference between cats and dogs. Cats are already housebroken when you get them. Dogs you have to teach.
That's mostly true. Yeah, I would say that's mostly true. Cats are pretty strange like that.
Yeah.
So, well, what about me? I'm going to pretend here that I'm the odd man out. I don't have any natural ability. I don't have any way to study. Am I cut out of the magical world? Is it impossible for me to learn the arcane magics and be let into the inner circle? No, it's not. But the ways you get that power as a warlock, which we're going to talk about, might be a little troubling, So basically what you have to do is you have to convince a much more powerful being, basically any more powerful being that has access to these spells, and just convince them to give it to you. Whether it's a demon that you have to make a pact with, or some kind of alien, eldritch intelligence, or even a god, a deity that has these types of powers. You have to ask for it, they have to give it, and of course there are constraints, and he who giveth can taketh away, as my mother always used to tell me.
Well, Dan, I know we're pretending for this purpose, but I do at various moments in our episodes suspect that you may have made a pact with some entity to give you your ungodly analytical skills.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that, Denon. I wish that were true, and it does seem like that on the outside. But it's all an act. It's all an act. Not powers granted to me by the infernal underlord or anything.
Well, I was thinking more of the mischievous fae. I don't really view you as an infernal underworld person, but the mischievous fae, are good at playing tricks. And having fun with the world. That's what I see. And that's really kind of what I like about the warlock in the D&D version. So often in like literature and stuff, the warlock is only a negative thing. And it's only making a pact with the devil that gives you power, which is interesting and an interesting character to play. But I do like the idea of having many different types of powerful beings, and depending on who you make a pact with, that controls a little bit of your magic. And you are much more, I feel like, a conduit, actually, than necessarily doing this yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I love it because you brought in another electrical word there, conduit. But yeah, you are not the source of the power. You are simply a conduit, a focus, a lens for that power coming from the deity. They are able to project their power through you, and it's at their decision whether or not they're going to let you call upon their power to create those spells. And often they're doing it, maybe they just like souls, and so you give them a soul, they give you some power, works out. But also, generally speaking, you kind of have to be doing stuff they want you to do as well. And so it's also this interesting thing of, it's also just kind of laziness on the deity's part, where they're just like, I don't feel like doing this. You go do it, and when you need a lightning bolt, give me a call.
I wish it were that easy. You need a lightning bolt, give me a call. I like that. I mean, that's pretty interesting. But this is a way, in my opinion, this is a way for the average person, if they're willing to give something up, they can have access to this magical power if they weren't granted the intelligence or the natural ability to get it on their own. So it is a way to get access to this world. Now, one of the things that I want to transition into here is because we're talking about my infernal powers, Denon. I believe those were your exact words. And one of the things that I want to touch on, because I think that this is probably one of my favorite types of magic user, and we're going to use it as kind of a theme throughout that. But that's the necromancer or the necromancer. I like saying it both ways and kind of throwing people off. I believe one's the English way, one is the American way. I don't know which is which, but I do get raised eyebrows. But these are basically arcane magic users that can manipulate life and death systems. And in some ways, this, if you can... in necromancers, they'll raise the dead, right? So these are people who are in work in the worlds of zombies and skeletons and vampires and things like that, raising things from the dead. And in a lot of ways, I think of this as the arcane magic user being able to do that as a scientist, kind of raising Frankenstein. But we're going to talk about divine users in our next episode, and they seem more like the asking God to bring someone back to life, or asking someone from below to raise them to do your bidding. Asking a higher power to do it. But to me, this world is very interesting because it operates on a completely different set of rules and systems, in my opinion.
Well, I think yes and no. The basic underlying energy is very much the same, Dan, but you're right. The way you're using that energy, the way you're controlling it, and the rules you have to follow in these life and death situations become very different. I am intrigued. I didn't realize you could say necromancer any other way, and I've already forgotten the other way you said it. But
Necromancer.
Oh, necromancer. Interesting. But given how much the Caribbean or the Caribbean is related to zombies and that type of life and death magic, I'm wondering if there's a connection that if you can pronounce something two ways, you can either be alive or dead.
Or, well, except you can pronounce it three ways, because it could also be the Necromancer.
I don't know what you're doing there, Ben.
Necromancers.
Necromancer.
But
probably the least used of the three, but definitely an option.
Probably, yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's this interesting concept of putting the energy back in things that lost all their life energy. It's just another conduit for all this magical energy flowing around, whether it's making fireballs or bringing back the dead.
It is true, and I think the point I wanted to make is that there's an arcane version of this, So put that, everyone listening, put that, in your back pocket as we talk on. But I want to talk about something, Denon, you came up with here. One of the special rules, you called it Dennin's Law of Unused Magical Energy, and I think we're now moving into the house rules section that some people do, because magic is unwieldy, it's strange, it's alien in some ways, but also very real. And this is a way I want you to explain it to me. But I believe you kind of came up with this out of whole cloth, which is why we're naming it after you. Although I do believe you only name things after the second person who came up with it.
Right.
So I'm wondering, who'd you plagiarize this from?
Well, I don't know. The beauty of being the second person is you never know who the first person was because you're not bothering to read the literature.
Fair enough.
So
enough.
Actually, it was during our brainstorming for this, it suddenly occurred to me you can upcast spells. So you can cast a lower level spell using a higher level spell slot. Why can't you downcast? And it's an interesting way to do a house rule. You don't want people running around regularly casting third level fireballs with first level spell slots. So what do? You make it risky, right? It's sort of like trying to shove too much electrical energy through your electronics. It might blow up. So you have a cool risk system where the spell might misfire. It might go through and just become weaker and be semi-successful. Or you could have an interesting feedback loop you create, and it becomes unexpectedly stronger. That would be a very low probability, but I think all of us can agree, maybe not Ben, he likes rules. There's a lot of fun when you add a bit of element of chaos to the world, a bit of risk, a bit of uncertainty. And so I think this is a great game mechanic that in that desperate moment, when you have that one first level spell slot and the big bad guy's coming at you and you go, I'm going to try and force a fireball through that. And instead of killing him, you accidentally blow up.
Now, I think if I understand it correctly, I want to make sure I heard you correctly, Denon. This is if you have low-level spells, kind of like the AA batteries, and you want to smash them together and create a D battery to go up, to use low-level spells to cast a higher spell, right?
Exactly. You're going to use, but you're going to take the risk because you're not even going to put the spell slots together, Dan. You're just going to use one low-level spell slot and try and shove a D amount of energy through a AA battery.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Well, and this is an interesting thing. This is to go back to the battle bots. This is what causes lithium battery fires. It's overcurrenting them. It's trying to
Yeah,
draw
Denon.
too much current through the battery at once. And one possibility is if if you keep the battery cool enough, or if it's a short enough duration of a pulse, the battery won't heat up enough to explode. But if you're running your weapon motor for too long, overvolting it like this, you will fry your battery and potentially cause a fire. So I like this idea here, Denon, because you're basically shorting a lower one of these low capacity batteries and hoping you don't blow it up.
And even better, Ben, you just gave me a perfect image, right? Imagine the end game scenario. You shout, "I'm going for it," and the barbarian starts fanning you rapidly to give you advantage on your saving throw as
you
your
go.
brain is cooled with the massive fan from the barbarian that he just happens to carry for the occasional overload moment.
Overloading wizards is something you should always carry a fan for.
Or to, do the sports term, have the bucket of ice water, thrown on you while you're casting the spell to keep you
That's
cool
only
enough.
when you win a championship, Ben. Clearly, you don't watch enough sports. You don't get the Gatorade just because you're hot.
Well,
win something.
is not blowing up the big bad demon winning the championship, Dan?
No, that is. Yeah, for sure. But, you're younger than I am, and you're in the participation trophy world. So I don't want to just make it clear to you and people younger than you. You don't just get Gatorade thrown on you. You need to win something memorable, like a championship, defeating the demon, or even figuring out how to smash that energy through a AA battery. That you might get Gatorade for that, Denon. That's actually pretty impressive. So
Okay, sounds good.
This is, the world of spellcasting is very, it's complicated. The spell slots are weird. The magic world is unpredictable, but I think we've done our best to get it all under control. And I love the house rule. We're ended on the house rule. And if there are things that you like in your campaign world, tell us about it. We want to hear about it. You can always find our show, FGGGbT.com is the website, and our social media is right there, FGGG, at FGGGbT pod on X, at FGGGbT on Facebook. But of course, you can get in touch with us individually. Denon, where can people find you?
Well, on Instagram, I'm just Dennin Michael. I often switch my name for fun. I do also do Physics of X, where I have some wonderful, fun videos about the physics of X, where X is everything except politics. If you are going old school, Facebook, it's Prof. Dennin Michael. You stick a prof in there. And YouTube was old enough for me that I'm just Michael Dennin. And I do have a website, denninmichael.com.
And Ben, where can people find you? I feel like there's one power word that you utter and you suddenly show up on every social media platform.
Yeah, it's one power word, but it's not power word kill. It's Bsiepser.
How do you spell that?
Bsiepser.
And I can be found on X at Daniel J. Glenn, on Instagram and TikTok at The Daniel J. Glenn, Facebook at Analytical Mastermind, and I have a website, danieljglenn.com. And of course, if you want to support this show, I've put together all kinds of merch, and it's on my website, glencodesigns.com.
And if you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe.
If you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss an episode.
And finally, we have described everything you need to navigate the world of arcane magic. So use this power with responsibility. Remember, you always want to be a white wizard, not a black wizard. Is that how it works? Dark wizard, light wizard? Actually, I don't know how they're delineated. We want to be a good guy, not a bad guy. How about that? Until next time, thank you for watching.